Welcome you all. Paddy, can we open our meeting, please?
Good Chair.
Smartphones out. On to karakia. First karakia on the list. It's got a little heading there that says Inoi, prayer. And it starts off with He Hōnore. I'll just wait for everyone just to get there. Right. You set volume, I'll set pace. He hōnore, he kororia ki te atua, he maunga rongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa, anga e te atua he ngākau hou, ki roto ki tēnā o mātou. Whakatongia tō wairua tapu, hei āwhina, hei tohu ia mātou, hei ako hoki i ngā mahi mō tēnei rā. Āmene. Kia ora, Chair. Thank you very much. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you. And I love the little picture of our celestial compass. Thank you very much. Okay, apologies. We have an apology for Rick, who's going to be late. We have also Mike Paku, who's going to be late. Anybody else?
We leave at 1.
I think we're still going to leave at 1. Someone to move those apologies.
So moved.
TY, second Sheriff. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Are there any notices? And we've got housekeeping. Oh, I do have housekeeping. I am instructed to tell you that the exit is there, just in case. Okay. And there. Don't all charge the same exit if it's a tsunami. Actually, if it's a tsunami, do we run to the hill or go upstairs to this building?
If there is a long and strong earthquake, we will drop, cover and hold until it stops, and then we will move quickly down Dalton Street and then up the hill on the pathway.
Excellent.
Chair, can I just bring to your notice that it's World Health and Safety Day today?
I'm being so pedantic. You would have noticed.
Only today?
Okay, and also just to notify everyone that we are live streaming and recording. Not that you wouldn't know. Thank you very much. Any conflict of interest declarations?
Yeah.
Yes?
Now, officially, as of yesterday afternoon, signed the form, so I'm a member of Mātangirai Reserves Board on behalf of Tātou Te Wairu.
You mean on the submissions?
No, I'm a trustee
Oh, okay.
on behalf of Tātou.
I don't think that's a conflict, is it? I think, but you want to register that? Yes. So we will register that, but not.
Register an interest, but I doubt it's a conflict.
Yeah.
No, that's the Martin.
Any other? Oh, there are no other. Well, we will actually move to accept that, Michelle, as a. Oh, it might not be.
That's where the wastewater plant is at the mouth of the river.
So, Jeff, will you move just to accept that and Craig,
Do as I'm told.
all those in favour, just to acknowledge Michelle has made that declaration. Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes from the 24th. We've all read them.
I'm happy to move.
We have a mover. Second to Charlie. Yes. Charlie will second. All those in favour?
Aye.
I'd like to confirm those minutes for 24. Follow-ups from the previous council meeting.
Take those as read. Chair.
Any comments regarding the follow-ups? Great.
Yeah, thank you. For Ian, actually, there was a bit of correspondence between yourself and Councillor Ormsby on the more efficient way you're doing the analysis of riparian strips on the urban side of things. So that reads really well. Thanks very much for that info. So my question is, are there other areas in which we can quicken things up, as you've managed to find there, to gather further information so we can get on with various tasks that we've decided to do already?
Yes,
Councillor. So in the correspondence, you'll see in the second part of the correspondence, we asked about the question was, what was the survey design?
Yep.
And there's a note, a paper that was attached to you in the correspondence that sets out the survey design. What we've noted is that using aerial photography, we're able to avoid the need to actually go and physically look at a lot of these sites. So that's a method that's allowed us to speed up the process to assess state condition, those sorts of things. There are some sites that we obviously can't do that.
Oh, no, sorry, you maybe misunderstood. I understand that, that's great. Are you able to, so you found a quicker, more efficient, a better way of doing something than was originally cited, that's great. Are you able to apply those findings to other parts of your operation?
Oh, absolutely. Look, aerial photography is one of the big game changers for us. As the Sentinel imagery has become free, so we're not going to pay for a lot of aerial imagery now. So we're using aerial imagery, particularly in our land science program, pretty extensively, and the team are developing algorithms that effectively allow them to use the aerial photography to assess land cover, soil vegetation, down to a whole lot of detailed site work. So, yeah, we're always looking for a better mousetrap.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
And Craig, thank you. Ian, any other follow-ups? Okay, do we have someone to move and receive the previous follow-ups, please? Anyone will move? Martin, will you second that? Thank you very much. All those in favour?
All right.
All right, thank you. Item 5, organisation activities through April.
Again, Chair, we'll take this as
Yeah,
read.
as read, and we'll have questions.
Yeah, we're just catching up with you. Sorry, Chair, we're on to the catchment significant. Are we up to there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Okay. There's a James. I've just lost my own document now. In the document, numbers 28, 29 and 30, if I'm still on the right place, it's in and around a commentary on Napier City Council and Hastings District Council wastewater discharge consents, which is great. That's obviously normal, and you're keeping us up to date there. I note that in the various long-term plan consultations that are out there, for example, Hastings long-term plan, they note that their stormwater assets have not reached the end of their useful lives, but we should be preparing for a renewal program which will commence in about 10 years. And so from the environmental perspective, and from what I understand, what stormwater in the Hastings area goes into the Karamu in many instances, and with all the contaminants there and heavy metals. Are we engaging in any way, shape or form with Hastings in particular and around their long-term plan and or the parameters of consents that they will have, particularly in regard to treatment of storm water? And for the record, I think it's much more urgent than 10 years for them to start looking at some solutions there. I wonder what your thoughts were from an environmental perspective as we're aimed to clean up the Karamu.
So first of all, just a acknowledgement that what is in your papers has a formatting error in it. So you may have noted that items 28, 29 and 30 are a replication of what's in the above section with respect to the Omaranui landfill expansion. So the text in there is not accurate with respect to wastewater discharge consents. I have followed that up with a team, and I'm advised that there are, in terms of the wastewater discharge consents, there are no significant compliance matters right now. We do know, of course, that the outfall for Napier City Council, which was recently repaired, is going to need a more durable solution longer term. There have also been issues with respect to the performance of their trade waste pipe from Onikawa out to the treatment plant at Awatoto. But other than that, the Napier City Council wastewater network is operating to consent. Hastings District Council, I'm advised, is replacing a section of their wastewater operation at the moment. but that's on the on-land portion as opposed to the marine portion, and that is not at the moment giving rise to any significant compliance matter. With respect to stormwater, the policies and rules under the Regional Resource Management Plan have been reviewed in collaboration with Napier City Council and the Hastings District Council through the tank plan change process. Those revised rules, which significantly strengthen what is required for the performance of their stormwater, are going to hearing next month under the tank plan change. And as noted in there is reconsenting that will occur further down the track, and we will to some extent be needing to take into account what's notified in that plan. And what I'm less clear on and would need to come back to you on is whether those policies and rules will have full effect. There's a timing issue obviously with respect to them coming off their current consents and tank becoming operative. Notwithstanding that, we are working with both councils around options to improve stormwater in the shorter term. In the Hastings District Council case, there is the possibility of some wetland creation around both the Whakatū and Tomoana area, and part of the Hastings District Council's industrial development in that area is looking at the possibility of putting in some wetlands to extract the contaminants. Similarly, we're working with Napier City Council at the moment around studying the contaminant loading going into the Ahuriri estuary by virtue of both our drainage network and the urban stormwater network. And that work that is currently being undertaken is to inform the design of a polishing wetland to be constructed in conjunction with the potential Ahuriri Regional Park. So the technical work is going on that. Councils in both cases are working collaboratively with our staff, and we look forward to bringing to you some physical solutions which will help reduce the contaminant loading into our marine environment in both cases. Having said that, there is work to do also with our communities, particularly our urban communities, around their own behaviours and choices that obviously lead to the contaminant volumes that we're then having to deal with by way of treatment solutions.
So as we go through those various processes, and I understand, the consenting side is with the consenting people, that's fine. But is it fair to say the Regional Council and Hastings District Council share the same ambitions for cleaning up our various fresh water across the Ahuriri, across the Karamu catchment?
Certainly, as expressed in their participation in the tank process, they have signed up to, as part of that, ambitious targets, which are quantitative in the tank plan change for reduction in contaminant loading through the stormwater networks. The practical questions of how we get there by way of specific pieces of infrastructure and where that's located, etc., is still to be worked through, and we will be looking closely at the long-term plan intentions of both councils to see whether or not the planned investment does reflect that expectation that was agreed through the tank process.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It would be great if they do both reflect the same ambition.
I'll go Neil, then you, Joe.
Supplementary to Craig's question, Mr. Chair. I just wondered, James, whether you could just briefly outline the oversight or the examination of the long-term plans of the respective councils, given the new requirements of them through tank and other obligations, whether there's capacity and investment being undertaken by those councils in the 10-year time frame of their long-term plans.
In very general terms, what we're seeing in respect of both councils is a significant increase in planned capital investment in stormwater over the 10-year period. The more technical question of whether or not those specific investments will yield the types of outcomes in the receiving water bodies that we aspire through the tank process to achieve is not something I couldn't provide you with a definitive view on at this point, but happy to provide council with advice, particularly as our respective partner councils go through their long-term plan deliberations and decisions over the coming weeks.
And are we looking to submit to their long-term plans in that regard?
So there is an intention to submit in respect of Napier, Hastings and Wairoa. Certainly Central Hawke's Bay has closed, and the Group Manager of Policy and Regulation, as well as our Council of Central Hawke's Bay, did present to the Central Hawke's Bay District Council last week in respect of their long-term plan, and expressed our views about the necessity of their capital program embedded in their long-term plan in meeting our regulatory requirements and our collective aspirations for the improvement, in that case, of the Tukituki River in particular, but also coastal environments such as Parongaho Estuary. So we will be preparing brief submissions to the councils on that, and we'll be speaking to them in person as well.
Sure. On the Tukituki, item 39, Lower Tukituki River hydrodynamic model is now calibrated, and it looks like it's actually not up to scratch to the 1 in 500. Have you got any visibility on to what extent it may be?
So I'll pass to Chris.
Look, that's very early information, so the team are working through that. Obviously, it's now a priority area in terms of that project, and they'll continue to work, and we'll get a more detailed analysis of that at the next EICC meeting. Very comprehensive one.
Thank you.
Charlie?
Item 14 and 15 on the Northern Catchment. I went to the Waikare River Catchment Group meeting. That was really well representative of all the farmers in the Tūtara and Waikare district. A really positive meeting. I think it's going to go pretty well, that catchment. The second one is, have we set a date for the field day in Wairoa? And item 15. Cool, thank you.
So
Alpi,
thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So just following on, the next block of information, 16 through 18, refers to activity in the Wairoa catchment, in particular around number 17, meeting with the Gisborne District Council for Māori Partnerships team this week to discuss cross-country collaboration. So Te Ranga Marae is on the Hangaroa River, which crosses from the Gisborne to the Wairoa. It's the only marae on that river, and so I'm expressing on behalf of that marae our willingness to, at some stage, soiree alongside the conversation and look for opportunities from the mana whenua perspective as well. Kia ora.
Chair, noted, Chair.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you.
Martin, didn't you want Mike? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the question also to do with the flood protection schemes. One's just a simple information point, and Chris may be able to answer this most conveniently. 36 site prioritisation, and just really what are you prioritising in terms of these sites with 12 identified in the IRG project plan? What are the priorities and how are they selected?
Yeah, so the detail of that is still being worked up in terms of a framework. One of the key aspects we're looking at is the consequence of a failure. So, for example, that's why Motio and Taradale, our stop banks, are currently high in the priority, because a failure there leads to major infrastructure damage. And I think that's something we can touch on at the EICC meeting to give councillors comfort of the process we're going through to prioritise.
The consequences as opposed to necessarily likelihood.
Yeah, so we want to get it to a similar level of likelihood. They all meet, certainly on the Turaikuri, all meet the height requirement, but it's around the resilience to a prolonged event. So that's where we're working through those. And so those high risk areas, we probably want a lower probability of failure, particularly Taradale, because we have a significant flood event all the way through to the estuary.
My second question on that, thank you, is modelling of the Heretaunga plain scheme. It's okay for a 500-year event, no significant issues to report. However, this excludes the effects of climate change. Climate change will be assessed at a later date. I'm just wondering what the implications of that approach are. Are we missing something? Are we kicking a can down the road? How long are we doing that for? And is ignoring climate change a highly material factor in the scheme review?
So it's a really challenging area. So we're working with NIWA to understand how to model the impact of climate change. There's no agreed methodology for modelling that. And it's highly sensitive to the approach. So we want to get an agreed approach in the experts and then apply that. And so my understanding is a couple of years' time, we'll have a clear understanding of the methodology of modelling climate change in those particular models.
And what, if anything, sorry, just to follow up, what, if anything, do we do or not do that we might have otherwise done in the meantime?
So I think we've selected a 1 in 500 year of protection, which is a very high level of protection, and I think we can give comfort that that'll see us through the next period of time. Once we understand how to fully model the effects of climate change, we may or may not need to do anything. And I think we've got plenty of time to do that work over the next 10 or 20 years.
All right. That's very helpful.
Chair, I could just add a little bit more context. Under the Deep South National Science Challenge, the government has funded over $20 million worth of work to scale down the UK Met Office's Earth system model, which predicts climate change at the global scale, down to a New Zealand-specific Earth system model, which takes account of Southern Ocean conditions and what's known about New Zealand's climate to provide greater prediction for New Zealand. And that National Science Challenge has now funded work specifically around flood infrastructure for local government in New Zealand, which aims to scale that Earth system model for New Zealand down even further to a regional analysis. So that work is as Chris said, a couple of years away, but we've got significant investment going at the national level that will help inform, with a greater degree of accuracy than we have today, what we need to do to protect our community over the longer term.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
James. Mike, Michelle, did you have a... Okay, Mike.
Kia ora, Mr Chairman. Number 40, just in regards to the gravel management. So this was a topic that came up within the Māori committee. Gravel extraction is a big kaupapa sitting on hapu table at the moment, from Heretonga right through to Tamatea. Can we have a report prepared for the Māori committee? There's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation going out into the community. If we want to head that off, it's about providing the proper information. So if we can have a report prepared for the Māori committee, Māori Standing Committee, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Mike. That's a very good suggestion. Gravel extraction's on everyone's mind.
On everyone's mind. Kia ora.
Any other questions or issues?
Chair, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Will.
You're right. Just a comment on number 55, the Tuk Trails. As you all know, or Alex and the team down there, got some money from PGF successfully to expand the Tuk Trail down there, and we were blessed with a visit from the Prime Minister last week to see how that project was going, how that money was being spent, with a particular reference to checking in on the job creation that money was purposed for. And just interesting to point out, probably the biggest issue for that project is that crew that were employed finding and moving on to full-time jobs. So that was a good outcome, and I think the Prime Minister would have been pleased to see the results of the project and those employment opportunities.
Well, for that update. Do we have a mover to receive and note? Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Henny White, seconded. All those in favour? Aye. It's carried. Thank you very much. Call for minor items not on the agenda. Do we have it, Michelle?
Positive one, it's Te Waiora o Te Wairo, it's a PowerPoint.
PowerPoint, excellent.
2 minute one.
Great. So songs.
She's allowed 3. Thank you. Do we have any other minor items? No, there we go. The whole time to yourself, Michelle.
No, sorry, I did have one.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I guess you'd call it strategic planning.
Okay.
It's a minor item.
No others? That's good. Okay, we'll move on to our decision items. The first one is the establishment, is item 7 of 2 new CCTOs to operate the Food East. Who's going to talk to this, James?
Jess can speak to the paper.
We want to hear the,
Do you want to hear the
verbal submissions first?
submissions first, or have any discussion on the paper?
We had 10 submissions, yeah. We read all those.
No, you got
Oh,
it.
Two.
We've got two speakers. We
Oh, we have
Yeah.
2 speakers.
But they're not on till
welcome, Paul Bailey.
11:30. It's scheduled for 11:30 speakers.
so we are well and truly ahead of time.
Something else.
Lead us in a half an hour song, Mr Chair.
But can't we, if the both of them are here, can't we hear them now?
Do we have both of them here?
Only have one.
There's one here.
We could hear Paul and then let him get on with his day, or he may wish to stay for the discussion on the substantive paper, though.
Well, he finds his council meetings particularly exciting. I think we'll move to another one, to both submissions here all at once, and so we'll move to the... You okay with that, Paul?
Yeah, no, fine.
Okay, thanks. So we will actually move to fix... Oh, that'll be quite quick, Rick. Item 8, fixing a common seal.
I'll so move, Chair. I like seeing you dressed up in your wizard's uniform.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Second, Sheriff. All those in favour? Aye. We've got time to do...
So the civil defence one,
We
unfortunately,
have to wait for him too.
wait for Ian. He's going to be here about midday.
Why are we waiting?
What about the report from the Hawke's Bay
Drinking water. We can certainly do that.
We could do the Maori Committee too, so we'll do the drinking water one. We've got half an hour before the other submitter comes in. Right, let's go for that.
So with respect to the drinking water joint committee, I don't know whether either Hanawai or Martin wish to speak to this as the representatives. That it's a relatively self-explanatory report. The focus has obviously been on submissions, on other processes that are occurring alongside. So obviously the future of the committee with respect to its terms of reference. So probably take the report as read unless either Councillor Williams or Councillor Ormsby wish to add any supplementary comment.
Yeah, just one thank you, and Councillor Ormsby may wish to address this as well, but it's really just the conversation that we commenced but did not complete at our last meeting was triggered by the proposed insertion into the terms of reference of a transition to Three Waters. And we realised that there was a much more fundamental issue at stake, and that really that was a bolt-on of quite a massive reform initiative onto a terms of reference for a committee who'd essentially done its job, or which had essentially done its job as conceived post the Havelock North inquiry. So I guess the issue that I'm just putting on the table here is a need as a region and a plea, I guess, through the regional leaders to ensure that we stay ahead of this reform curve that is, driving at us like a freight train, quite literally. We could end up regionalised from Gisborne to Wellington as a new water services entity. And what does that mean? We've done this whole process as a region to stay ahead of this reform discussion, and I'm very keen to ensure that we do. So if this terms of reference isn't the place to do that, there needs to be a place for regional collaboration, coordination, talking to each other, and making sure that this is the very best outcome at the end of the day for all of Hawke's Bay, and particularly as it relates to our functions as a regional council. So thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Hanawai, do you wish to add?
Yeah, and I just want to thank the Drinking Water Joint Working Group for actually completing those tasks based on the recommendations from the Havelock North inquiry. They've done that very collaboratively between the councils and the Ministry of Health. So now we're at the point where we have to review what our role is and where our future is going to be, knowing that there's Three Waters reform. So that's the place we're in at the moment as a committee, and it will come back to our next committee meeting around where we go from here on. So just a bit of an update, really. But if there aren't any other questions relating to the paper, I'll take it as read.
Related to the paper? Well,
Just on 6.2 on the Napier City's chlorine-free review, after each of those points, like what's the summary from that? Is it still an objective to get to chlorine-free, or are those financial numbers too great, or what was the summary or conclusion of that?
Well, my recollection is that the 200 million, well, actually, Api can probably answer this better than anyone, but there is an element of that has to be done to the network regardless of chlorine, and I think that's a very large component of the largest number that you see there. It might even be 200 million. And so this is a matter for the public to decide through long-term plan processes which option they support, but perhaps.
Api, would you like to add anything to that?
So actually there's not much I can add to what Councillor Williams has said other than maybe some details around dollar marks. But to answer your question directly, Councillor, absolutely we're still on a journey to chlorine-free. 2/3 of the cost being committed in the long-term plan currently before our community is around building a network capable of providing the standard of water that we want. And then the third phase after that is for the city to determine whether or not they still seek to pursue another $70 million to $100 million worth of investment beyond that to achieve chlorine-free. So short answer, 60% of the work has to be done regardless of chlorine-free, and the remaining 40% is left at the discretion of our city to determine its value.
Anyway, that was actually a very good update. Thank you.
I thought Bill told us nothing wrong with the infrastructure.
What's that?
Well, just muttered.
No, you're mumbling to yourself, Councillor. Neil.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether perhaps it is more a Napier City issue than the water drinking group. It's to do with the infrastructure that's proposed, and there's major expenditures highlighted in the respective plans. But has there been consideration of, if you like, recycling the so-called purple pipe network? If there's an upgrade, that there's a combination of blue pipe and purple pipe, bringing back stormwater reticulated into the households. Has that been considered as a part of the reticulation investment?
Sorry, Councillor, thank you. Short answer, yes. Although I'm not familiar with the blue pipe, purple pipe scenario, there are conversations and we are considering changes within the confines of Napier City to identify where we as members of the public, and particularly around development, where we can start implementing systems which help to ultimately alleviate the pressure on our systems, but enable more activity to happen on the property, such as the water storage tanks from rainwater, as well as supporting systems around grey water and wastewater. So that's mostly because the system currently is doing the job we've asked for it, but we know it's not going to meet the demands of the future, and so there has to be a significant amount of investment in that space. But I think what you're asking is, are we considering how we're going to engage with our community and the changes we need to make at a household level?
That's a part of it, but it was more, there is the opportunity to actually invest in infrastructure that puts so-called purple pipe in the same trench, bringing water back from the stormwater resource that we have and using that for garden or domestic use. So thereby recycling and conserving water.
All I can answer on that is I welcome the opportunity to invite our staff to talk to it specifically, because our water team can give you more detail. But I do know that is in our conversations, and as the wastewater consent and the pipe and the plant start approaching the closing of their consent, part of our conversations with mana whenua and iwi across Hawke's Bay, as well as our constituents, will be looking at a range of options, and that is definitely not something we're going to shy away from.
Thank you, Api. Any other questions related to this paper? Otherwise, do we have a mover?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair.
I have a move.
You're moving. Thank you, Henny White. Seconder, Rick. Do you wish to speak, Henny White, on this paper? You've done it. Rick? All those in favour, the recommendation?
Aye.
Aye. It is carried. Thank you very much. We will take the report from the Māori Committee now. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, a couple of issues from out of the report, I suppose, that have been centre. Of course, the public submissions in regards to the establishment of Māori constituent seats for Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And of course, those conversations have kind of dovetailed into Hastings District Council and Napier City Council and their various positions in regards to that particular kaupapa. And although they both have ended up in the same place, they have taken different pathways with different timeframes about how they get there. Overall, good turnout especially from our Māori constituency to the submissions, not only on the Māori roll but also from off the general roll. So we look forward to the verbal submissions on the 3rd and 4th, and of course Hawke's Bay Regional Council has that final decision on the 19th. That's actually following on from Hastings City Council, District Council, who had that same decision on the 18th. So it's going to be a busy week. The other one I just really wanted to touch on was in regards to the Whakatū Inland Port development. This has been proposed by Napier Port, which is basically forms part of the subsidiary of Hawke's Bay Regional Council through HBRIC as one of its activities. Just really wanted to congratulate Napier Port on the approach it has taken to consulting with mana whenua. Although there may be disagreement around the actual siting of the inland port, there's an openness for discussion and an openness from Napier Port to actually support mana whenua in those conversations, which is a change from what has been the status quo of previous times. So that's good to see. I suppose the other one is Tank is not too far away from approaching us. It would be fair to say that I believe that's going to be a bit of a tense period for us all. But it is what it is. It's just a combination of 8 years now of discussions. And at the end of the day, we need to move through that process to come out the other side, wherever that leaves us on that other side. But it's certainly needed. It has held up a lot of some of the other discussions that do need to happen. I'm going to take the rest of the report as read, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Michelle, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'd just like to add that the eDNA water sampling presentation, we really cut it in, and I really enjoyed that, and it's just fascinating, fantastic, and we were given a sample. We're arguing over where in the Wairau River we're going to take that sample from, but we're thinking of going over up to King, where the korokoro, the eel there, Lamprey, so to see if they're still there. So we were talking about that last night. So really enjoyed Daniel's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions? Thank you, Craig.
Thanks. Thanks, Mike. It's really refreshing what you were saying there with the engagement with the port. Just wonder if you could just tell us how the launch went on the 14th of April, but also which is in the report here with the Marine Cultural Health Program. But any lessons learned, because it's really refreshing what you were saying there, and obviously something had changed. Time changes and individuals change, but something changed, and the way you described it is there seemed to be a landing point of actually we generally agree with the proposition. There is dispute about where it might be, and so just kind of compartmentalising that little part of it and realising everyone's in pretty much a similar space. Was that roughly what you were saying there?
Yes. So on the 14th went well. It was received well. I think the other part is an understanding that although there may be disagreement, you still need to engage in order to work your way through the process the arguments will always still come, but there's times and places to have those arguments, and it's not always at the start. I also believe that there has been realisation from those that are wanting to engage with Māori that sometimes slow is sometimes the fastest way. So having that upfront engagement, taking your time through that part of the process, gets you to the outcome faster.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd comment on that too, Craig. I've been to those meetings at Whakatū. I think the community, they're very upset that the inland port is being considered to be put there, but they really appreciate the frankness from the port staff. And they've been totally frank and honest and upfront, and they've been totally willing to engage and have the conversation. So whilst, as Mike says, they still probably don't agree, they have got to know each other and they agree that they're having a really good, vigorous debate about it. That's been a good quality thing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Api? Oh, sorry, Will.
Two. The first is I just want to, it might not quite fit in here, but the report triggered two questions for me. The first, one is a statement more than a question, and that's around really encouraging to hear the work that's happening with the port and mana whenua. And I would take, the question I have is for council. I know that the port and mana whenua groups have done some work on Māori monitoring within the harbour, and wonder whether or not that has been their work has been presented to council, because it's fantastic effort on behalf of mana whenua and the port, and what they've achieved shifted some of my thinking on where we could be going, and was just wondering whether or not, my first question was, have they had the chance to present that to council?
To this council here?
Yes.
Not as yet, but there was the open day that was held down at EIT, and invitations sent out to all. We actually had some of our staff who attended that.
Oh, cool. All right.
I think it would be very good to bring it to probably the Environment Committee at some stage. The next Environment Committee agenda is very full, so we might look to do that at a subsequent meeting.
It'd be definitely worthwhile. I found the presentation and the delivery insightful, and extended my thinking around how we might be able to move forward in some of the areas for Warrell. So HBRC may find other gems they can glean from that work. And the other prompt that I received from the report actually takes me back to significant activities. Item number 21, an application to upgrade the Opatama treatment plant has been lodged, and the work is progressing as required by the abatement notice. Full plant upgrade is anticipated to be completed by October 2021. I recall expressing some concerns from a mana whenua group in this regard around activity at the Opatama camp. I also know that concern was expressed through the Māori Committee, and was wondering whether or not you could suggest how I might get an update on that particular item, because I see that it's progressed right through to full plant upgrade, and I've missed the journey from the expression of concern to the statement of completing activity. So that's a problem for me, so if I could identify who I might touch base with.
So, Chair, Katrina Brunton can provide an update.
Cup of tea sometime? Sounds lovely.
Excellent. Well,
Kia ora, Mike and Michelle. Just, you mentioned in the operational report about the gravel, and then it's noted here concerns raised about gravel extraction. Are you able to just elaborate a little bit what that concern is? Or?
Yeah, so I think it's just because of that global consent. So we've seen the minimisation of what's gravel extraction down the header-tongue end, the lower end, and that's something that has to do with Chilean needle grass. And so we've seen activity being intensified up in the upper central Hawke's Bay area. So perhaps a bit of a shock for some of the whānau up that way as to the amount of extraction and amount of activity taking place. And I think that's where the concern is coming from. And of course, some misinformation is getting out into the wider community. Hence the reason why we're actually wanting a fuller, detailed report to come back to the Māori Standing Committee, just so we can get the proper information out. It doesn't take away our concern, it just means we're better informed. Yeah.
I think it's a very sensible idea, Will. People can easily get wrong impressions, and we live in a bubble, of information, so we need to get that information out of the bubble.
For sure.
Any other questions? Otherwise, Mike, will you move that we...
Happy to move, Mr Chairman.
I will second it. Oh, I wasn't there actually, Rick, you were there.
I was there.
Yeah, you will second
I'll second it.
report. You wish to speak further, Mike?
No, thank you.
Rick?
I'd like to speak. I'd like to say there's one element on the report here which hasn't been addressed, and that is the connection with civil defence. We had a very good presentation by civil defence, and I think civil defence is recognising the incredible asset it had during the pandemic and its connection with the Taiwhenua and the great work they did. And civil defence recognised the need to strengthen that and grow that, which is very good. And there's going to be a meeting with civil defence. So civil defence is going to invite the Taiwhenuas to come to their place of work in Hastings and have a seminar and do some work. And I look forward to them strengthening that relationship. This is only good can come out of this. It's a sign of maturing of the relationships and the strengthening of those relationships. And I think we're going to be well served by this in the future, even better than we have been in the past. So I just thought it was a fabulous extra from the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Any other speakers? Otherwise, I'll move that we accept the report from the Murray Committee. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Our second submitter hasn't come in. We've still got 10 minutes. I was just wondering, and we didn't discuss councillors' outside bodies, but I did have a report on the outside bodies. But Jeff, I was wondering whether you could give us an update on the cycling trails. Is that too straight off?
We haven't got our next meeting fairly soon, so it's been a while since we've had our meeting. Apart from, and you were, I don't know if James was there at the opening of the underpass of the highway. And that, it's very important that we actually have safety at heart, and that was at considerable cost, but I think we need to spend that sort of money on our cycle trails. Our cycle trails are in very good heart. I would say our HBRC staff member is doing a fantastic job. There are some modifications required in the future. There is a lot of use of our, if you look at our usage pattern, it's huge. And coming back from Poreri Beach, centre Hawke's Bay, at Easter, it was heartening to see the bumper-to-bumper traffic coming out of Hawke's Bay. And a lot of those cars I noted had bikes on the back of them. So people are actually coming here to using our trails, which I think we need to really acknowledge. And we need to make sure that we keep the quality and improvements going. So once again, as the Hawke's Bridge Council, it's very important that we continue to make that investment, but also not just investment, but also give it the time, and maybe even the staff give them the time as well to make the improvements that they needed.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I've also noted that there's just huge use of the cycle trails. So thank you very much for that. So, Martin, I'm interested, I hate to load you guys on this, but the HBUDs, given that we are doing the spatial plans now, Hastings particularly, is HBUD in limbo? Where is HBUD
Well, it's actually
now?
the segue to the minor item that I wanted to raise, so if you want me to address that minor item now, but
yeah,
it does, well, the first point I was going to make under the topic of strategic planning is that the last meeting I went to, I think it was last September, we basically deferred the HPUD's program, and there was a review that's supposed to happen in a couple of years' time, if not next year, avoiding this. And in the knowledge that there's a more fundamental issue here, but like Three Waters, what is the strategic vision for the region? Where is growth going to be? How much? And where is it going to be accommodated? And what infrastructure is needed for that? And what does that mean for the Heretaunga Plains? And so again, it's sort of like there's a bigger job here. Do we kind of bolt that into a committee that may have run its course, or do we need to get into the helicopter and ratchet it up a level? And so that was part of my prompt. There doesn't seem to have been any further HPUD's committee meeting, and that's sort of in limbo, and there's lots of we've had a deputation about inadequate protection of the Heretaunga Plains. Hastings has got a different view. They're fighting hard. But more importantly, we've got the Strategic Planning Act coming at us. So we're going to have one, and we're going to have to assemble a mana whenua and regional leader stakeholder and governance partnership arrangement around that. On the transport side, we're hearing, we get advice from transport engineers and thought leaders in transport planning that the very first intervention for transportation is not roading infrastructure, but in fact planning. And if you think far enough ahead about the region we want to be and are going to be in 2050, we design a transport solution for that, rather than just sort of building more roads for where cars are going today. And we've got the Kotahi plan. So what is the regional vision that we are planning for that would align with? And so it all makes me think that the reason I proposed the minor item is that I do think we need to be proactive here, and there's a possible need, even an urgent one. If we're looking at the future of committees like Joint Wastewater, perhaps we need a strategic planning committee with representation from the local authorities and from mana whenua to actually get into this and start thinking about timeframes, scope, vision, and so that when the Act comes, we're already 2 or 3 years down the track rather than starting flat-footed. Because just about everything we do comes back to, well, where's the strategic plan around this? What is our regional size? Is it 200,000 people, 300,000 people? Where do they all live? So that's my minor item, and it is only intended as a minor item, not for discussion at this stage, just to put it onto the agenda for James to think about talking with his counterparts, or Rex with your counterparts, because I do think we need to front foot this, or we are going to be caught short when the time comes. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Martin. It's a really sensible suggestion. I'd like James just to comment, because where do we go with this to get a regional approach? So we have TLAs going off in different directions doing their spatial plans, and where do we fit in the first instance, and how do we encourage collaboration between everybody on this issue? James, you've got some thoughts with the CEOs?
So the conversation with the other councils has commenced around the opportunity and the barriers here. I think it's fair to say that the current focus of councils on long-term plans is creating a semicolon in that conversation. I think one of the things that we need to think about, particularly as the regional council, is the status of the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee, which obviously has its own Act of Parliament and is somewhat sacrosanct, if you like, in terms of its status within the region with respect to resource management planning. The government's reforms of the resource management system are going to throw up some questions for that committee anyway about its role and scope, and we need to think about the evolution of that committee and what is its role in more expansive regional planning that covers things like transport and housing and urban development that the district councils are presently responsible for. So this is a very big question, and it's very complex because there's lots of moving parts, and the government's reform agenda obviously is moving at pace as well. I do know from discussions with Ministry for the Environment officials is that there is interest in regions starting to pilot what is coming through the resource management reform, potentially. So I think there is an opportunity for the region collectively to speak with central government about how we might start to blaze a trail in this regard, because I think we all recognise, as Councillor Williams has pointed out, there are questions being confronted this very day about the future investment, future planning of our region, and for that reason alone we do need to push this conversation along at some pace. It's not something that can drift for years, given that we have pressures with respect to transport and housing and issues of coastal adaptation and climate change, water security. All those things are live and real today. So I'm happy to take that conversation back to colleagues across the other councils and come back to this council with some more concrete thinking about how we take this conversation forward.
Thank you, James, and I will too. I'll raise it with the mayors because I have been concerned about it. we do need we need to collaborate on spatial plan. There's no doubt about it. And it's where HBUD really fits in. So thank you, everybody. We will go back to item 7. We're slightly early, but that's fine. We're going with that clock there. We only have one of our submitters, Paul Bailey. So, Paul, do you wish to make your submission now?
Yeah, no, I can do that.
You come up to the front table. Paul, you know the rules. You've got 10 minutes and you're allowed to and take questions from councillors. We can be a little bit liberal since you're the only one here.
That's all right. No, I'll make things up on the fly as I normally do, but that's okay. Hey, look, kia ora koutou. My name's Paul Bailey. Just making a submission on your on the notion of forming another CCO, whatever it is called, to for what do you call it? Food Central or something?
Food East.
Food East.
Food East, right?
Not
okay.
West.
Food East, not West. It was interesting going through the staff's feedback to the submissions that have been made about the number of submitters who were concerned about the paucity of information around this particular concept of Food East. And I appreciate, and I just wanted to delve a bit deeper into that without trying to trample on commercial sensitivity. So in that respect, I'm going to put some questions to you guys instead of the other way around. I was interested to know, are we actually investing in a business as a going concern, or are we just doing an investment into some property so that some business can be run in there, or a business can run in there? It was really unclear from all the documentation you put out on the concept. Is anyone able to answer that for me?
Well, I actually will go to Neil and Rick because they are two directors of HBRIC. Would you like to?
It's a submission thing.
Well, he's asked for it.
It is.
Normally we ask the questions and he gives the answers. I mean, why are you tolerating this behaviour, Chair? The place is out of control.
Well,
all the place out of control.
My point is that you had a number of submitters who are making the same sort of comment I am, is that the information you put out in the submission document or the consultation document was lacking. And it's really hard to get your head around what Food East actually means. What is our investment of $4 million from HBRIC and $1 million from Hastings District Council? What is it, $12 million from the government? What are we actually getting for our money? Are we buying a building for a whole lot of businesses to come into, or are we actually just investing in some business that's going to do something else? I don't know. It's unclear. That's the only thing I want to have. That's one thing I want to have tidied up. And without any sort of response, it's very difficult for me to say whether I support or otherwise the notion of putting together another couple of CCOs. I mean, I understand why you're doing that. That's pretty straightforward, and it's just business structures. But it's the idea behind it which we're really unclear about. So the other one, in that respect, you talked about having to work under HBRIC's statement of intent. So can we assume that you're expecting a 5% or a 3% return on the investment? Don't know. Wasn't clear. There was nothing in the consultation document. So at the end of the day, that's my submission, is that we just don't know enough to make any sort of comment on it, really. And that, I think, is really unfortunate.
Thank you, Paul. Looks like nobody wants to comment from here, but...
I think, Paul, you ask a fair question. So the government wants to see established clusters for people who are involved in the food industry for them to grow and develop. And there is a model in Hamilton where they have such an entity. And so a building is constructed, it's like a semi-open shell, it's flexible spaces, and it can accommodate a variety of sizes. In part, it has in Hamilton, they have a range of number of single desks there. So people got a desk and work collaboratively with other people around them. And it draws people together, and from that you get a synergy and you get development in the food industry. They offered us $12 million as over a period of time, and it had to meet certain criteria.
the Hastings District Council were initially very interested in it and started it. They invited other parties to be part of it. Some joined and fell away in the end. The Regional Council Investment Company decided it would put some money in to make sure it stumped up and got prospects, and it does have prospects. Yes, it's expected to make a return. Yes, it's expected to wash its face, make a return. At the end of it, as long as we compliant with, as we will be, the terms of the gift or the grant from the growth fund, well then the asset will belong to the shareholders of the company, which is HBRIC, HDC, and one other.
Yep. Okay.
And it is to have a place where people can come, they rent it, and it's to generate out of that further activity and support the food industry. That's what it is. It's a seeding place, if you like. And we've been to have a look at the one in Hamilton, and it is worked very successfully. It requires good leadership, which we're hopeful we'll be able to get, but it has been up there very successful. We've talked to people that work in the place, people who manage it, and it's been sort of a kind of a pilot. So we thought it would be a good idea.
Yep. So if I was a guy who was in my kitchen whipping up a new sort of chutney or whatever using our great Hawke's Bay produce that we have here,
sure.
And I wanted to expand that business to take it to a bigger scale.
Yes.
What you're suggesting is that I could go to Food East, and instead of setting up my own factory and everything else like that, I could go in there for a wee bit and get all the working with all the synergies of other people that are around,
exactly.
and sit down and do that. So it is a proposition that is open to anyone of us from small size to large size.
Exactly, and what they found in Hamilton was when you turn up with your chutney, Paul and his chutney, Paul then meets other people who make tomato sauce and other things, and you have a discussion with this, and there's a sort of a sharing of ideas, a cross-pollination of ideas, and when you're struggling to think about what something is, well, you can go around the corridor and talk to people. They're there, and if you can't talk to them, they will, like Kiwis, know someone who can talk to. So it's giving support in the development of food businesses. And given that we have an enormous range of top quality produce in this region, we do a lot of manufacturing. It was felt that this was an ideal fit for us as much as anywhere else in New Zealand. We should be able to make this hum.
Yep.
And we're looking to have, instead of just exporting the raw product, finished product. So having some more creativity and investment put into it, we thought was a good thing.
Thank you for allowing.
So we'll leave that as the in regard to your request, even though it was a little unorthodox.
Never been orthodox.
No, that's right. Are there any other questions for Paul?
Yes, as a response, I think, Paul, thank you for your submission. You raised a valid point around, if you like, transparency of the transaction. And potentially we could have put more thought into providing that level of detail, which is a legitimate question. But in terms of that business case, etc., there is a criteria that HBRIC applies, and this does meet that criteria in terms of return on the investment. So there are a range of investments taking place, transacted through HBRIC, and they are required to meet the expectations of council. But there are, sitting amongst that is a degree of commercial sensitivity, which put us between a rock and a hard place in terms of tabling that.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just say thank you, Chair, for allowing Councillors Barker and Curtin to give that much clearer explanation. And in that respect, given what Councillor Barker was saying, I'm quite happy to support the proposal. I think it's a great idea. If someone's developing a chutney in their kitchen, they can get some help somewhere. Yep.
Thank you very much, Paul. Really appreciate it.
I've got a question for Paul.
Thank you.
That chutney range, have you got a vegan option?
Mate, I like my steak and chips way too much to go vegan. Got stuff
Thank
there.
you, Paul. Really appreciate that. You continue to show interest in the business of this council. We
Yeah,
really
for one reason or
appreciate
another. I don't know why. But that's all good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
So we will move to the paper. Jess, would you just like to talk
Sure.
to the paper? It's just practical stuff, really.
Yep. So the paper attempts to respond to the key themes that were expressed through the submissions, but just some key points for your decision making today. The decision is about creation of the legal entities to operate Food East, should it proceed, with HBRIC as the majority shareholder. The CCTOs will only be created should the investment proceed, so the investment itself will trigger the creation of the CCTOs. They wouldn't be created otherwise. The decision to proceed will require council endorsement, but will be made by the HBRIC directors ultimately. And probably just worth noting that in terms of the returns or the commercial viability of the opportunity, HBRIC has a governance structure which is guided by its statement of intent, which identifies investments which enable regional economic growth as part of its mandate. And the investment strategy for HBRIC indicates a total portfolio return requirement of which this investment would need to support. So I think that responds to the commercial requirements of the investment itself. But happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Jess? No questions, I'll move straight to the recommendation. Will someone move either 4 or 5?
I'll move.
Move 4?
1, 2, 3, 4, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Have you got a seconder?
Who was the seconder? You? Your seconder. Craig, do you wish to speak?
Just quickly, thank you, colleagues. This is a significant but first major really investment or endorsement of the intention of HBRIC. So the information in the inquiry from the member, from Paul, we've heard that's, as Councillor Curtin said, very, very valid, and hopefully so much more can be divulged once this has gone through its proper process of HBRIC and all parties are satisfied, and we ensure the longevity and success of that first investment.
Thank you, Craig. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, it's a curious process, this one, and I think Mr. Bailey's right to question the level of information that was able to be disseminated in that process. But in reading through the paper, I made a little note that Food Hub is not on trial here. This is a consultation on a proposal to establish an entity through which our investment vehicle, in line with the statement of intent, can itself decide on the merits of that investment and proceed accordingly. So it's simply a structural decision we're making here. But I guess more importantly, and the reason I seconded the motion, is that I'm very much in favour of this council, where appropriate, taking a leadership role on regional investment that promotes social and economic wellbeing. There's so much we do that's about environmental control and management, but there are opportunities that we quite uniquely through our balance sheet can promote investment in this region to the benefit of people and communities, and that's part of our local government mandate, and I think it's entirely appropriate, and I would rather we did that with a regional focus, knowing where the jobs are being created, than just had our assets in managed funds, and I've shared that view before. So it's up to HBRIC to make the call on whether this thing works or not. We need our return, and I think in principle it's a great concept.
Thank you, Martin. I think you highlighted that very accurately. Any other speakers? Rick and then Henny Wai.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pick up on the point about former Councillor Paul Bailey making that we weren't as good on the information as supplied. I don't want that to reflect adversely on this council or the staff. The fact is that the decision made to proceed with this was at the last minute. The whole thing just sort of fell into place at the last minute. We weren't quite sure whether we had it organised or not. We did. It was a bit of a cliffhanger. Then it meant that the bureaucracy had to follow. So it's just a shortage of time. Hopefully we get better timing, better processes, but you just have to deal with what you've got at the time. And if we hadn't have moved, well, we wouldn't have this potential. So I'm satisfied that the outcome in the end will justify us being a bit short on process, but it's not ideal, and I agree with that. criticism.
Anyway.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to support where we're going on this. And just picking up from Paul's submission as well as the submissions that have come through with the theme of concern around lack of information. And I understand the sensitivities at this current time, but I do implore that at a time where the information is not sensitive, that we somehow get that out to the public for them to understand better what it is we're doing. So if we could have that come into effect in some future time. Thank you.
Yeah, I suspect it'll be big news when it happens.
So, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and some valid points made already by my fellow councillors, and it does bring home the need, in my view, to at a judicious point, once decisions are more concrete, that we actually are open and transparent about what that investment looks like. And I appreciate Councillor Williams' point that in fact the food hub itself is not on trial at this point. But the submitter, and I think all of us would agree, that ratepayers are entitled at some point to ensure, beyond just compliance with the Statement of Corporate Intent by HBRIC, that is a return on investment, and they're entitled also to what Councillor Williams has referred to as, if you like, the social return, to have a good line of sight on what that is. And I think ultimately, in this case, we'll be able to demonstrate a very good story, a great story, in fact, emerging out of it. But it doesn't remove from the directors of HBRIC and by this council the need to fully inform the public and the ratepayer and give them a clear line of sight to what's actually transacting here. So very happy to support this, obviously. With the caveat that at the appropriate time we come back with a clear explanation to the public about what's gone down.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Craig, do you want to wind up?
No, I think points all noted and well made, and hopefully in the very foreseeable future, Chair, HBRIC will announce and inform this council further as to the details of the proposal.
Thank you. Okay, we move on and seconder for 1, 2, 3 and 4. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll move to item 9. Ian has joined us. Welcome, Ian.
You do have it on. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Is it all right?
Okay, Ian. You can take us through your report. You've got a video, have you?
No, so...
PowerPoint.
So James has asked me to give a PowerPoint on, similar to the one that you gave, that I gave the Joint Committee, on the trifecta of earthquakes and why things happened the way that they did. Obviously the report on the meeting of the Joint Committee, that's obviously the minutes of the Joint Committee. And if there's any questions on those minutes, any points of clarification, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, can you just run through, I'm sure there will be some questions, but if you just run through your PowerPoint, I think that'll be a useful background.
Okay, so look, you may recall, or you will recall this, because it probably woke you up in the early hours of the morning on the 5th of March. That was what they're calling the trifecta of earthquakes, which was the 3 earthquakes that happened off the east coast of North Island and also the Kermadec Trench. So what I'll quickly do is just take you through a little bit of context about what the CDM group does and doesn't do and is able to do and what it cannot do. What happened, some of the key learnings for us and what we're doing about those key learnings. And sorry, this doesn't include an update on the rain or COVID-19 events. So just quickly, tsunami assessments and warnings are a national responsibility. We don't have the ability to give advice, technical advice on tsunamis or and issue warnings, and that's quite clear through the National Tsunami Advisory and Warning Plan. So GNS and the National Emergency Management Agency, which was the old McDem, they are the ones that have responsibility. All we can do is pass on the information that we get given from at a national level. However, any evacuations that are required are responsibilities of CDM groups. So that plan, which I've just mentioned, has gone through a number of changes, and the last one was in June of last year, in response to a number of events that have occurred over the last 4 or 5 years. The important thing for us is that it sets our response indicators. So very quickly, based on the location, magnitude and the depth of the earthquake, we have an idea as to what is likely to happen next in terms of the warning system. So is there going to be a national warning that's going to be sent out? Is there going to be a emergency mobile alert that could be sent out? And again, that is the first emergency management alert, which goes onto your phones, which you will have heard before, is actually required to be sent by centrally through the National Emergency Management Agency, not by CDM groups. But it does accept that that plan does accept that warnings, as in the text alerts or any other warnings, are unlikely to happen for a local source tsunami. So obviously the Hukarangi Trench is our biggest source of a large earthquake, and that could arrive here in Napier, for example, at anything between 20 minutes and 30 minutes from the actual earthquake happening. Hence our message around the long, strong get gone. I would also point out that no earthquake or tsunami is the same, and the prediction is very difficult and lengthy. It takes time for them to run their models and to get advice out, and that advice can vary depending on what region you're in. So they're running a national model. We do have our limited ability to run some models here regionally. So Craig Goodyear and his team have got a model which very quickly can tell us what our response indicators are as to what is likely to happen here in Hawke's Bay. But again, that cannot supersede what the messages that we're getting out from a national level. Just in terms of the team, when this occurred, we had 3 vacancies, including our public information management person, who deals with the media and our social media and all the rest of it. So we needed to we had somebody working in that space who actually had no experience or very little experience. Since then, we've managed to fill these 3 vacancies. So and we've also managed to acquire a very experienced public information management person who's got a lot of media experience. So that person starts in the next month or so. And I think the other thing I just want to raise with you is that we've been in our office team, so there's 14 FTEs spread along the region. We've basically been in response or semi-response mode since February of last year with the COVID, Napier floods, and then events such as this. And look, we are not first responders. We are not the police. We're not FENS or the Fire and Emergency New Zealand. We don't have a shift system. So if I use the example of the police, once you've finished your shift, you go home, you turn your phone off, and then that's it till the next morning. We don't operate that way because we're basically on call 24/7. So my phone is always on and always with me, and I'm always having to respond if something happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is what happened here, and my staff are the same. So our context is a little bit different than the emergency services, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. So in terms of, and I think this is a Facebook post that we received, and this sort of, hopefully you can read that, sort of puts, I don't even know who this person is, but I thought it actually summed it up in terms of what it is that we do and what we're able to do as a team. So essentially what they're saying is that this person is saying is, hey, you need to take responsibility for yourselves. Don't expect civil defence to be there. Because we actually live in the community ourselves and we are affected by this. Now, I live in Napier South, so I actually had to respond to that initial earthquake at 2:30 in the morning with my family, so I don't have the same sort of amount of time that you may have if you weren't living in a tsunami evacuation zone. We are basically doing our best to make sure that people know the risks and also that we get the right information out there to the public at the time. So what happened? So we had those earthquakes. The first one was East Cape one, that was at 2:30 in the morning. And then we had the Kermadec Deck Event 1, which was at 6:41 in the morning. And then the other Kermadec 1, 2, which was the biggest earthquake. And that was at around about 8:30 in the morning. I'll just play you this, hopefully, just to sort of illustrate. Hopefully, maybe not. Okay, so what this illustrates is that, if it was playing, is that there's waves of energy that go out all across the Pacific from these earthquakes, and they actually bounce off various islands, the Chatham Islands, across here in terms of South America, and it makes the model very hard, very confusing. You've got all this energy heading in different directions, reflecting off shallow waters, etc. And actually running the model, as I said, takes time, and that is probably the most frustrating thing, I think, for everybody, is that it can take up to an hour until we get confirmed advice. And when you've got 3 earthquakes that have happened at roughly the same time, it makes it even worse. So you had energy bouncing around from the first one, which was then changed by energy bouncing around from the second one and the third one, which was happening in different locations. So, so it is actually quite hard to predict, and it is one of the most frustrating things that we have to deal with ourselves, is trying to give some good information to people. Okay. So, look, 3 earthquakes were within that timeline. We had 3 sets of tsunami activity. The East Cape earthquake, the one off the east, the first earthquake was actually 2 earthquakes, and they are a very short distance apart and separated by just a few seconds, and again complicates the model, and it takes a longer time. It took longer than normal to actually analyse it as a result. So in terms of our scenarios, we have local, regional and distant sources. The first earthquake was clearly a local source tsunami. The Hikurangi Trench is sort of on the borderline between local and regional, what's classified as a local or regional tsunami. Local tsunamis will happen, arrive very quickly, as I said, within 20 to 30 minutes. Regional scenario is 1 to 2 hours, and distant source for us being something that happens off Peru or such like, could be 9 to 12 hours, depending on where it happens. And that sort of is an example there as to what I'm talking about. So as you can see, Hikurangi Trench, most of our problem is actually in the region 1, which is our local source tsunami. Because of that, and that complication and those different scenarios, you had different threat levels actually occurring between regions. So, for example, most of the activity occurred in what I'll call the northeastern side of the east coast, the northeast part of the east coast, so between sort of Northland and down to East Cape, and then the southeast of the North Island, where we are, it was actually a lot different. So in that other area, you were talking about land threat, so they were talking about tsunami that was damaging to land and to people, whereas in our area, they were talking about a beach and marine threat. The problem is, and it happens, is that emergency management alerts are sent to different parts of other regions. So you had alerts that were being sent to parts of Northland, parts of East Cape, and also Bay of Plenty. And in this digital age, people are more connected than they ever were. So on Facebook, they say, well, we received an alert up in Tauranga. Why haven't we got one here yet in Hawke's Bay? We actually never had a land threat, which is why you would never use the emergency management alerts to actually send out for a non-lander threat, so for a beach and marine threat. So look, I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but really what I'm trying to illustrate here, and we do this straight after an event, we write our timeline and what happens so that we know what decisions were made. But essentially, that earthquake happening at 2:30 in the morning, within sort of 10 minutes, all of my staff were on a conference call, Microsoft Teams, all talking to each other from Central Hawke's Bay through to Wairoa, and we use that as we are driving even, so we keep it open. and we're able to talk to each other. And that's part of the reasons why we had a little bit of a fall down with one of our first media posts. So we had some initial discussions very quickly with Craig Goodyear. His advice was that based on the location and magnitude of that earthquake, that it was unlikely to be a significant threat to Hawke's Bay. If anything, we were looking at 5 to 10 centimetres worth of movement, if anything. What happened was in that discussion, as there's an open channel, the new person, and I've put an explanation mark next to the 245, put out a social media post basically reflecting that, when that shouldn't have gone out because we were waiting for national advice to say that that actually wasn't the case. That created a little bit of confusion, and even though we withdrew that post within 10 minutes, people take a copy of it and then it gets posted around. We were actually in Hastings at the Group Emergency Coordination Centre, within half an hour. And I have to drive from Napier. It takes a bit longer for me to get there, but obviously within sort of half an hour we were pretty much activated in that in our facility in Hastings, which I think is a pretty good. Personally, I think that's a pretty good effort. Considering we all had to wake up, I had staff members who live in the tsunami evacuation zone. Some of them evacuated to the hill, personally I had to look after my family and make sure that they were safe before I activated myself. As you can see, it took a lot of time before we got some information from NEMA, so now talking about 1:30 in the morning before we got no marine or beach threat to Hawke's Bay, so that takes a whole hour. We issued that through our regional warning system, so that goes out to our regional partners, our emergency services, councils, around about 5 minutes later. So it was all happening fairly quickly. And then we got a map at about 4 o'clock in the morning. So just to illustrate that and how that creates confusion for people, is that this is the map that was issued to us at I said about 4 o'clock, just after 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:07. As you can see up the top there where I've highlighted, because this is a national product, it was actually generated at 3:30 in the morning. So as soon as we put that on our Facebook page, you had people saying, you've had this since 3:30, why haven't you put it out onto Facebook yet? And that created a whole lot of churn in that social media space. Look, there's little we can do about that. Putting this map out there was the right thing to do because it clearly shows that in Hawke's Bay there was no land threat, and people needed to know that. They also needed to know that there was a land threat to the other parts of the North Island. But it just goes to show how, in this digital age, how information can be really, people can really not understand how the flows of information work and take the worst case scenario, which was that we've been sitting on this since 2:30, which wasn't the case. We didn't receive it till 4:07 in the morning.
It says up the issue at 3:30, so it's 37 minutes.
Yeah, 37 minutes until we got it.
I think the point is that it's issued by GNS, but NEMA don't put it out until they've done their processes, right?
Yeah, but still, it's gone through several hands, so it's generated 3:30, and it's up at 4:07.
Yep. Okay, so we got to 6 o'clock in the morning, and for that first earthquake, it was cancelled, thankfully. And then we had the second earthquake, which was at 6:41 in the morning. And again, I just want to, all of these earthquakes were right at that cusp of what I call that 7.3. That is at the cusp of our response indicators. So for Kermadex, I think it's 7.2. Although I make the point there that when it initially came through, it was actually assessed at 6.8, which is below the threshold. So again, all this confusion which is generated. So typical of an emergency, it's never clear cut. Went through all that process, and by 8 o'clock that was cancelled. But again, we were already there, so we stayed there and we actually dealt with this one as well. And then we had the third one, which is the one that's probably caused the biggest issues. And that was an 8.1. So obviously, as I said, that 7.2, once we got something at 8.1, that really started to concern us. So this is when they started sending more of the emergency mobile alerts, and they were sent to parts of the country from the Bay of Islands right through to Tolaga Bay. And again, that confusion again, not to us, because we did not, at that stage, they didn't think that we were going to have a land-based threat. Again, within 5 minutes, we're putting out social media posts, and the regional warning system is activated and things are sent out. So again, almost 3/4 of an hour between 8:30 and 9:13 down the bottom there, until we actually get our first national advisory telling us that it's actually under assessment. Okay, and again, we'll go through all this, but the key point is at the bottom, and so our web page, which normally receives about 180 visits a day, on that particular morning had peak traffic of 6,600 people trying to access it, and over the day 36,000. So that caused it to be overloaded. It didn't crash; it just slowed right down, and so. I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of lessons and what we're doing about it. Obviously, at that stage, we did know that there was a land threat in terms of, well, not a land threat, sorry, a beach and marine threat. We do have some residential properties, very few, that are in the red zone. And so, as I said, we have a responsibility for activations. By that stage, FENZ and police were already in our facility in Hastings, and so we got them to start the evacuation process of any residential buildings in the red zone. And council staff from Napier and Hastings assisted with that. And the rest of it's pretty much the process from there. Formal media release is one that, like you see all the time from the council. It's one that goes out all nicely typed up and gets sent out to all different organisations. We did send that out, but in reality there was a lot of information going to national media from the National Emergency Management Agency. And then finally, at almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we finally got the all clear that there was no further beach and marine threat for Hawke's Bay. So the key learnings for us, this is always a dilemma, trying to get the balance right between giving quick advice, as we were trying to do earlier in the morning at around about 2:30, 2:45, and giving certainty to the public. So we were trying to give certainty to the public, but at the same time, and trying to give it quickly. So trying to get that balance between those two things and being factual. And so that first social media post did not meet that criteria, although what we're trying to do is actually give certainty to the public, but we didn't actually have all of the facts at that stage. And ensuring our website obviously has capability and backups. Capacity and backup, sorry. So look, we've done all this, the website enhancement that was done a couple of weeks ago. It's been tested over the last couple of weeks. I think we've almost now got the capacity for treble what we had on that day, so 36,000 over the day, 38,000 over the day, and 6,000 at any one time. So we're comfortable with that. We've done all the national and group debriefs. We haven't quite done the full review of our social media, which was that problem with that post. We have a new PIM, though, has been appointed, a very experienced person, as I pointed out, and so when that person arrives, we'll start that process. We have started a Know Your Zone campaign. We are looking at sending out a letter to everybody who resides, or every property within the evacuation zone, saying you are in a tsunami evacuation zone. You need to do the following, you need to think about the following. And then we're continuing to follow up with social media and mainstream media over the long, strong, get gone message, in particular, and people needing to know their zone actually before these events happened, which was actually the biggest issue for us. Interesting enough, when we analysed the traffic for our web page, only 1/3 of it came from Hawke's Bay. The rest, almost half of it came from Auckland for some reason, and a fair chunk of it came from overseas. So we're not certain as to why so many people outside of Hawke's Bay were trying to go to our website, but that obviously created a few issues for us.
Obviously, you rank high on Google.
Sorry?
Obviously, you rank high on Google.
We've got quite a good Facebook following, yeah. So that's basically it. As you can see, it's quite a complex, but we are a learning system, as I keep on pointing out. We want to learn from our mistakes. Whether you like it or not, no response will ever be 100%. And I can say that that's the one certainty that I do have, is that we will always have, because that's the definition of an emergency, right? It's when things are not happening as they normally should be happening. So I think but the important thing for us is that when we identify an issue such as the web page, such as our first initial social media posting, that we actually sort it out.
Thank you, Ian. I know some of you have some comment to make, but could we just have questions first and then we can move to the resolution? Any questions for Ian? Right, we'll start. Uppy, then Craig, and then...
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Nice and simple, I hope. So given the complexities of trying to work with those disparate information systems to get the right data at the right time in front of the right people, and knowing the same deficiencies that were there with the old systems, such as the siren-based system, if the initial assessment doesn't arrive at your desk for 30 to 40 minutes, is there any value of revisiting the siren? Or do you have to wait until that data arrives before you can even make a decision on triggering that?
So if it meets a certain response threshold, then nationally they will send out the emergency management alert to everybody's phone straight away. So if there was an earthquake off Hawke's Bay above the 7.3, they will automatically send out an EMA, what we call an EMA, emergency management alert, to your phone, which says that there's been a long or strong earthquake, and essentially that people need to take the appropriate action. And that's all they can really say at that stage, that it's reached a threshold that they think that it could generate a local source tsunami.
So sorry, Mr. Chair, and so does it have to be a single event that breaches that threshold? Or is there a separate process where you have, like in this case, multiple events that are below that threshold?
It can be a single event, but obviously in this particular case there was 3 different earthquakes at different times.
And the system doesn't recognise when I say system, I assume there must be some IT in the background that measures that threshold and goes, bam, here's a message.
It is done, well, there's the buoys and all the rest of it which provide information into GNS, but the decision to actually send something through your phone is actually, it's a person has to make that decision. It can't be made automatically.
It's a judgment.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks. I just wonder if the buoys that you refer to are the buoys out there in the Pacific measuring.
Yeah, so the dart buoys, yeah, and we've actually had a whole lot of new ones just put in around the Kermadex and around the Hikarangi Trench as well. So NEMA have put in some new ones, or GNS and NEMA.
So thanks very much. I feel your pain and some of the uncertainty that this stuff creates, having actually been in that space a few years ago. And you're only as good as the information that you get from down the line. And I'm right with you, very supportive. Just one thing you said right at the end there gave me slight concern is, you said, your question is, why do people in Auckland or around the world access our website? Well, at 3 in the morning, if I'm living in Auckland or around the world, and I hear that there's this, what seems to be a very large earthquake in the Pacific, I'm concerned, so I'm seeking information. Hawke's Bay, tsunami, so it's just, I just wonder, that there's the search of information from people locally impacted and those interested in family. And so I expect, do you have even more hits on the website next time there's some event? So it's just, hopefully that's cultures in there of facilitating that, not just ignoring them or that's silly, it's a waste of time. Actually, anyone that comes to our website, because it's the World Wide Web, not the Hawke's Bay web, that's all. But thanks to you and your team. I know there's some execution issues and some uncertainty that play out, and you're in the hot seat. But that Facebook post or someone put up there, that commentary, is very apt, it's very true. And the colleagues, people in this space and all our services, they do put themselves in front of, between us and danger, actually. So thank you to you and your team for what you're doing.
Thank you.
you. Yes, thank you. I'd like to just pick up on what Councillor Foss has shared there, and the idea that you can't ever turn your cell phone off, and that you have to have it live beside you in the middle of the night. I mean, that's a huge burden just in itself. I'd find it difficult to sleep under that scenario, just in terms of what would happen. So we do owe you a great debt of gratitude. My question, though, could you just go back one slide, please?
Sure.
One more. 9:13, National Advisory. Okay. In the debrief, and you mentioned on one of the last slides, there was a meeting between National and your, your level of response locally. What are their learnings? Because if you're waiting for 45 minutes for an advisory that says it's under assessment, what can they do better that means the information you give out is better? And am I correct in understanding that the protocol or the rule is you don't communicate until you've been told what to communicate from the National Advisory Centre?
Yeah, that's right. So that at 8.1 would have, and that's what triggered so they would have been busy issuing the emergency mobile alert, which is not it's not just a matter of pushing a button, you've actually got to, so they would have done that, and at the same time they would have been waiting for something from GNS to say, well, what are we going to do next? And I think the learnings at a national level, and I haven't seen the report yet, but definitely it was around sharpening up the speed of which they can do things. They're always looking for opportunities to actually go faster. So this actually 3/4 of an hour compared to what I originally experienced about when I first came into the role, when we had our first one of these, and that was probably about 8 years ago. We were waiting for an hour and a half or even longer. So it has actually got better, and every time they have made improvements to the system. That's one of the key things for them, speeding up their system and improving the relationship between them and GNS. So in terms of making sure that at 2:30 in the morning, that the duty managers, so GNS actually does have somebody up and awake at 24/7. They've got at least two people who monitor the system, but that then they need to then talk to the national duty officer, who then. So it's just a process that we have to go through, which is why I'm saying, people feel a long or strong earthquake, they need to take their own actions and do their own thing.
But just on that, then, isn't it a situation where NEMA or the national entity can just interim? They should have an interim notification system, surely, that says we encourage now, as we always have, self-evacuation. In the type of event that we've just had. We'll have further details as soon as we can.
Yep.
I mean,
and that's what that 8:47 message was that went to the people's mobile phone. Yep.
Charlie, you've got a question there.
Charlie, then Neil.
Are you happy that our 4G network covers everybody?
Our cell phone network's got better and better, and obviously I take a keen interest in that. There are other tools that people can use to get, if they're on Wi-Fi and don't have cell phone coverage, that they can get the alerts as well through what's called the Red Cross app. So it's not just one. The emergency mobile alert is not just the only thing that people can get warnings on.
Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Ian, I want to give you a consumer's perspective on this, and I'm not going to spare the horses because there were fails from 2:47 right through till 2 from our perspective, and I'm left with the impression that our system works brilliantly until there's an emergency. Let me start off by asking you the question around the mantra to the public around long and strong get gone, and the meaning of that, because it seems like we've backed off don't get gone because it wasn't quite long enough. So in my experience at 2:47 standing up on Puketetri Road was that with several hundred other people, was that they felt it was long and strong and they should get gone. So if that's different, we need to educate around that messaging. We get to the substantial quake at around the 8:30 mark, and we're an organisation that needs a long lead time to evacuate. So we were busy trying to communicate with Civil Defence or anyone, and we couldn't. I used all my own networks, including trying to contact you, to say, what do we do? It concerns me that the points of contact we've got are insufficient. The phone numbers to the centre, our own reception staff here, reception staff from Napier City, etc. In my mind, those staff ought to have had a full brief about what to say when I ring up and ask them, or anyone rings up and asks. So we had a fail in terms of a coordinated effort. And I would suggest that we do have a mechanism by which all points of contact with our reception staff are fully briefed and they know what to say. We had the fail on the zone, the evacuation zone, and we were unclear whether we were in the zone or not. I should have known that. If anyone should have known that, I should have known that we were. And what I'm suggesting to you is that we need to double and treble, quadruple the effort to let everyone who's in the zone know that they're in the zone. And if it's a red mark on our letterbox or on the road or whatever, people need to know. And I'm suggesting that I see you've got in play there a campaign to do that, to inform people. Let's roll that out quick smart, because that's an important piece of the puzzle. The other aspect too, which was very distressing, was that we evacuated. We took the precaution of evacuating 60 people from our site, which is a very tricky thing to do, located up high, went up to Puketitri and etc. Unfortunately, the power was off because the utilities were working on the lines, and it occurred to me that why were they working on the line? Why did they turn the power off? Surely they should have been under notice to be available for the forthcoming tsunami, in fact to be available for that purpose. So I was concerned about that, the congestion on the road. There needed to have been cones removed, and all the services needed to be alerted to the fact that today is not the day you start digging up the road. Today is not the day you turn the power off. So it tells me that we've got a substantial job to do in coordinating the effort of all services to meet this challenge. And I suggest that we've got a lot of work to do, improvements to make in coordinating that effort. The other thing too, and this is where I'm suggesting our response to this is defensive and not helpful, is yes, we are first responders. We were first responders with information. If the mantra that we take responsibility from ourselves only goes so far, it's a little hollow for me, is that we collect the rate and we are there to provide that service. And I don't accept that we ought to put the burden back on the public to do that. We've got a big role to play, so I'm rejecting that notion. And as far as the media person being away, I just don't accept that as the rationale not to make the improvements that are needed. So they're my comments to that. I'm just hoping you're getting around to the question itself. What have we done around the telephone responsiveness from across the region?
Well, I think the comment that I would make is that we've never had a level of service where we can provide individual advice to people through the telephone system. We've never been able to achieve that, and to do so, for us to establish a call centre within half an hour to an hour to enable everybody from across the region to ring in to have individual advice is, I think, probably unachievable. But that is why nationally as well they're saying that people actually that live in these zones need to understand that they do live in the zones and that they make their own actions. And I think what Hawke did was perfectly fine. I mean, that's exactly the right thing. You evacuated, and that's what we're asking people to do. We cannot provide a call centre. The only time we've been able to provide a call centre to that scale was at the COVID response and to a limited extent the Napier response to the floods, and that took time to set up. You can't just flick a switch and then have a couple hundred people, which is what we would have needed to be able to deal with individuals at least who were ringing up seeking advice. So that's, I think there is still some further work that we can do on our call centre, and that it definitely is something we are working on, and with the other councils as well. So that's not just a HBRC thing, it's all of councils. How do we establish a call centre at short notice? But that does not happen within half an hour or an hour even to establish a call centre.
Wow.
Do we have any further questions for you?
Just on that, I just think let's tease this out. I mean, if people are going to have a place to be able to call and call immediately, you would have to have a call centre operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, wouldn't you?
Potentially, yeah, if it was immediate.
And to be able to manage the flood of calls that be coming in, you'd need 100, probably, telephonists, people on the phone there. So what would be the cost of that?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is it's not a level of service that we've funded.
But to pick up the point, not just to kill it, would it be possible to have a message put immediately on a phone number that if the likes of someone like Neil rings in, what do I do? An automated voice says, the earthquake such and such, advice from CDM is it's long and strong, go to higher ground. That would be sufficient, would it not?
That's basically all we can do, yes.
But can we do that?
Yes, we can do that. I'm pretty
Just
certain.
have an automated message to ring out the number and to get the message. So you speak into it. This is Ian, your friendly civil defence person.
If there's no more questions for Ian, I would like to go to the recommendation that we receive his report. Is there any other questions? And then you can speak to it if you wish. Other questions? Do we have a move to receive this report? Rick? Anyone, will you second? Martin will second. Martin will second. Rick will move. Martin will second. Do you wish to speak, Rick?
Just to say that these are really fraught things. I understand Neil's frustration. We'd all like to make things work better. And there have been improvements. Ian is correct that when I first came in contact with civil defence, there was no one on at night, the civil defence. There was a cell phone beside someone's desk, and it was just hopeless. I mean, so we've now got someone full-time, we've got a team full-time, there's always constant improvements. Are we going to reach perfection? I guess not, because these events come completely unexpectedly, there's no prior warning, and each one is different. So you can't have a particular plan for them. And I do agree with the mantra that we are responsible for ourselves. I just don't think we can do that. I don't think the state can be responsible for 160,000 people in Hawke's Bay in an emergency. We all have to make our own decisions with our families. That's why it says get yourself a plan, get prepared, and if it is long and strong, well, get your shoes on and away you go. There have been some good things come out of the last warning. For example, the port had to evacuate, and they learned a few things from that. So they're going to be better next time. I just think we just have to have our own self-responsibility. And I feel for the civil defence team, because no matter what they do, there's always going to be something that's not right from someone's perspective.
Thank you, Rick. Martin?
Yeah, just very briefly, I do wonder whether social media is a help or a hindrance in this context, but just simplifying the messaging, maybe a message when it's interim, that was strong. Because I went back to sleep and decided it wasn't. So people are making their own judgment calls. My judgment
You're already on the hill.
as senior manager or NEMA is that was strong, you know what to do. But the preparation step's absolutely vital. I agree in terms of Neil's very good practical suggestion of yellow or orange or red dots on your letterbox. It's probably got some merit.
Neil, do you wish to speak?
Just briefly, Ian, totally appreciate every emergency is different, and it'll throw up an issue. But I do think we need to focus on the practical. What does it look like from someone ringing up and saying, how difficult would it be to brief, for example, the reception staff here to say, look, today, this is your key message, get everyone on message. And so that's been my experience from the pandemic itself, if you like, not running around in circles on the phone for hours, as it was last time, trying to get an answer. And I think we need to solve that riddle, whatever that looks like. So that's my feedback to you around that. That was the 5th of March. We're now at the 28th. This is my first opportunity to brief you. I'd like to have had an opportunity prior to that when it was still fresh in my mind. And I think there ought to be significant engagement with those residents living in the exposed zones, even if we knock on the door and say, you're in the red zone. Let's talk about what you do in that situation. So we're engaging with our highest risk folk around that. So I'm pleased to see you've got a campaign going. Review the communications process, and next time we can do a little bit better. There'll always be a problem, but we can do better each time.
Mike?
Yes, Ian, look, I agree with everything everyone said. I think the other avenue is this, is we need to always remember, is the public media, radio, TV. They actually feed on these type of events, and they actually start to create a story within it themselves, and lead to some of the hysteria that falls out from this. Like Councillor Williams, I went straight back to sleep, and as for the 8 o'clock one, didn't even feel it. I was actually driving towards Napier. So for me, it is about keeping it simple. If it is strong and long, get going, especially if you're in that red zone, but you need to know that you actually are in the red zone. And it is about being prepared for whatever that civil defence emergency is. It's up to the individual to actually have a plan. Kia ora tātou.
Gerard?
Thanks, Ian, for your report, and surely when we have a situation on this, I won't be ringing you, because you'll be busy looking after us all. But also, I have a family member who's 24/7 on call, and the enormous impact it has on his family is just unbelievable, and I would almost say you will need to change that within your team, because it's not good for you personally and your family as well. That's the way I see it, because it actually is, you'll have times that all your mates can go to a certain place, you can't because there's no reception. Unfortunately, we've still got places like that, so you need to really look into that.
We are.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to put this motion. We have a mover and a second. All those in favour of receiving this report?
Aye.
Aye. Against? It's unanimous. We're breaking for lunch.
Can I just
make
sorry. One very quick comment, just apropos what we've just discussed. For members of the public who might be interested, there are 2 key initiatives in our long-term plan consultation that relate to this. The first of which is a dedicated Lifeline Civil Defence Emergency Management Advisor who will be working with the likes of Unison around our processes for ensuring resilience of our infrastructure. So take the point that we were not well coordinated with Unison on the day, and there is work to do there. So a dedicated civil defence role for that will be great. Also in our long-term plan is funding for a more professionalised contact centre for the Regional Council that will be resourced with information resources, so the person on the end of the phone will be in a position to provide guidance on a range of matters when the first call comes in, and what we would like to see that system is able to be updated quickly with advice from a civil defence staff during an emergency. So there are some things that we're consulting on, and we welcome submissions from the public on that.
Thank you. We're breaking for lunch. We have one minor item, and then we're going to go into public excluded.
Lunch.
Yep.
Oh, very good, Chair. Well